Good evening. Welcome to Spies and Spy Masters Happy Hour. I'm Amanda Olkey, Director of Adult Education at the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. And tonight we're very excited to host Spies, Comics, and Cocktails. We have three great speakers joining us. My good friend, national security lawyer and comic collector and dealer and Spy Museum member, Mark Zaid. Hey, Mark. Comic book writer Andy Diggle is joining us from across the pond. Hi, Andy.
How are you doing?
He is the author of 2 James Bond miniseries, Hammerhead and Kill Chain, and yet another Spy Museum member, the terrific artist, Shawn Martinbrough. He is also the author of many books, but we have this one handy, which is, how to draw noir comics, the art and technique of visual storytelling. So you're going to learn a lot more about the collections, what Andy and Shawn do. But since Shawn and Mark are members, we have a very special guest this evening. Our membership coordinator, Stephanie Haver, is just going to say a quick few words. Hey, Stephanie.
Hey everyone, thanks for being here. I just wanted to hop on for a quick second because, as Amanda said, I thought it was so cool that both Mark and Shawn are members. Thank you guys so much for everything you do to support the Spy Museum. And membership is a great way to support Spy because you get benefits like access to the museum, a discount at the Spies store, and exclusive member events. So if you're interested in joining a great community of Spy supporters, including Shawn and Mark, check out our website, and you can also email me at membership@spymuseum.org. All right, and thank you to everyone who is already a member. I know there are probably plenty of you in our audience tonight, so thank you guys, and I'm so excited to hear the rest of the program.
Mark gets a gold star for showing off his membership ID, and thank you, Shawn. And thank you, Stephanie. That was great. Now, of course, we have to have a drink before we get going, or to help us get going. And my fabulous partner in crime, Hannah Saloyo, who also is being deep tech ops tonight, created a video for us. She basically transformed the Spy Museum into a comic book. So let's see what Hannah came up with for us.
Okay, let's hope this works. And then there's a drink recipe at the end because you have to have a cocktail tonight. So hopefully it's something everyone likes. Let's try this.
I kind of wish that Hannah had turned me into a comic book. Everybody's got to unmute because I muted you because of the sound. We got to say cheers with our drink. And I want to cheers everybody and to the audience and all of you. And I want to cheer our new staff member, Lauren, whose hands were featured, shaking up that drink. So that was really, really terrific. And I am going to go away, but not far. And I'm going to turn this over to Mark Zaid, who is going to get us into a vintage comic frame of mind to kick the evening off. But you'll see the rest of us later.
Thank you, Amanda, and welcome everyone. Happy New Year to you all for joining us at the International Spy Museum. Virtual, unfortunately, still, but still that you're participating is fantastic. I love the Spy Museum. I do often programs with them, and I absolutely encourage you to join. I am joined tonight by my Bond, I should say, Zaid girl, Penelope, who often comes with me at the Spy Museum. If you've ever seen us there, she will be helping me through the evening. I'm going to give you a very sort of short introduction into the world of comic books and particularly spies. And I'm going to time myself so I don't go over because we have some great things to hear and see. So let me bring this in. Okay, so let me tell you just a brief introduction with respect to comics. What I do with comics, and when I speak on comics at Comic Cons, I talk about the history of comics. And I am particularly focused on really the 1930s to the 1960s or 70s. Once I started to go into college, I'm not involved as much with comic books as far as reading and writing, though we're going to hear from some great guests who that is what they do. I represent not only spies in my day job as a lawyer, but also comic book artists and writers and comic book dealers. So much of what I'm going to show you today or tonight is how spies have been viewed in comic book history as we look through primarily covers, just so you see what they looked like back in the early days when they were written for kids 8 to 15 or so years old, whereas today comic books are written for adults predominantly. Average age, I think, is around 27 years old. So vast amount of difference between those who write and read comics now and draw them versus what they were back in the day. And of course, James Bond is going to be throughout. And comic books have often and still are influenced by pop culture, whether it's movie or television. And Archie very often was, and people might be watching Riverdale nowadays and looking at it. But in the 1940s, 30s, and 40s, when spies were really coming into sort of favor in the comic books, they were mostly military-wise. They were fighting against our allies, or fighting against our enemies, the Nazis, the Japanese, whoever it might be back in the time period. Spy Smasher was a very popular comic in the 1940s, became a great movie serial in the 1940s as well. And here's just an example, spy cases from 1951, nice atomic bomb explosion in the background, or Spy and Counter Spy in late 1949. Spy Fighters in March of 1951. I'm going to come back to Federal Agent Clark Mason in a second. Spy Hunters in 1950 with a great presentation of the U.S. Capitol, since we are based here in Washington, D.C. And Spy Thrillers in 1955. Now, going back to Clark Mason, he was recruited. He was not necessarily a spy the way we know him, or we would know the CIA or other intelligence agencies, MI6 over in England, but he was recruited by the Institute for Boll Weevil Research. I'm not quite sure and probably doubt that was ever a real thing. But again, these were written for kids back at the time, so they didn't need to be historically accurate. But comics would reach into history. Top Secrets in 1947 of the FBI. This book is full of stories about the FBI, very pro FBI, J. Edgar Hoover time frame, where they were very much looked at, right? The G-men of the day, or the next year where we had some stories taken from history about different spies over the years, going back to trying to steal Abraham Lincoln, which happened in the late 1870s, 1890s or so. into just fictional work of another top secret. This is from 1952. And many of these books would talk about how the storyline was taken from secret files. I will probably tell you that that is not true from what I can find over my research. Atomic spy cases, as we entered into the atom age of comics, coexisting with the atomic age of our world, the Alger Hiss case and the Rosenbergs going on at this time period. And you see here, Donovan of Central Intelligence is one of the storylines. That was the name of the character in this. Of course, William Donovan was the founder of the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, in World War II, which became the CIA. But this character was a fictional character, but clearly it was a hat tip to Bill Donovan. And come on, let's go. And different ones. We jumped ahead. Oh, sorry. This is the problem with PowerPoint. Let me go back one. There we go. Kent Blake of the Secret Service. Again, you had a lot of comics where the agents were regular agents, Treasury agents, Secret Service agents doing spy work, which quite frankly, those agencies typically do not do, unlike the CIA and the Defense Intelligence Agency, National Security Agency. But these, again, written for kids. So then the Magic Agent, he worked for the American Security Group, the ASG, and he had all sorts of super thriller, supernatural powers that I'm pretty confident none of our real agents actually do. Danger, again, going back into with these sort of counterfeiter agents going after things, Treasury agents, things like that. This is from 1953. Foreign Intrigues from 1956. A great cover in some country where the U.S. Embassy is. And we jump one. There we go. Admiral Zacharias, he was a real person. 1890 to 1961, he was a rear admiral. He retired after World War II. He was the former deputy director of naval intelligence, and he had a television program he narrated in the late 1950s. This comic is from 1950, and he obviously made an arrangement with them. I dare say, I doubt these are true stories, all true and authentic. I doubt it, because he would be violating his NDA, his non-disclosure agreement, secrecy agreements, and I would have had to represent him, which is the stuff I do all the time. He helped with his vision create the Defense Intelligence Agency, which was formed right after he passed away. We also go into some of the lover angle lane. Those of you who might have been with us last year where we talked about polygraphs when it was in February with Valentine's Day. I don't know why someone was doing math on this cover back in 1951, but there was a nice story on I Was a Spy. And it wasn't maybe who you would have thought was the spy in 1951, because it was Madge who was actually the spy. Dennis wanted her to turn herself into the FBI, but as I recall from the story, she was a double agent, so she was actually working for the US government.
I didn't see that coming, Mark.
You know, it's a different world, and depending on when these came out. Pop culture influencing, like I said, the 1960s was very much influenced by television. So we saw a lot of spy programs become comic books. Man from U.N.C.L.E., a lot of movies about the Man from U.N.C.L.E. series. This is 1965. I Spy in 1967. Mission Impossible, still around today, of course. We'll see a little bit more about that later. This is also from 1967. Get Smart, Maxwell Smart, the world's greatest spy, as well as whoever his dog is there, from 1966. And some spies that probably most of us don't remember, Lancelot Link, which was a television show in the early 1970s. He has not seemingly made it to the big screen in the modern time. Maybe somebody can bring him back. But there was also lots of spies within the cartoon field. Secret Squirrel, maybe a lot of you know, from both of these from 1966. Of course, hey, Mickey Mouse has to join the spy world at some point in time.
Mark, we have a secret squirrel on the 4th floor of the Spy Museum for those in the know.
And you guys, hey, tell me when you're going to visit and I will be there to show everyone around if I can. It was a worldwide phenomena, not only comic books, but obviously interest in spies. Secret Agent X9. This one says of the FBI, but Secret Agent X9 was for most of his career a nameless person who worked for a nameless agency. This strip was a comic strip. It ran from 1934 to 1996. Pretty impressive. At some point in time, he was identified as being from the FBI. That was dropped in the early 1970s because the FBI was not looked upon very favorably after some of its shenanigans in the 1960s with illegal surveillance. What makes this version so of interest as to why I wanted to show it is because probably many of you are looking at it going, what is this one with this symbol next to it? This is the Australian version of Secret Agent X9 of the FBI. And a lot of these comics that I'm showing would have appeared throughout the world, but predominantly in the English-speaking world, in the United Kingdom and in Canada and in Australia, as this one is. This is from the 1960s and would have been reprints of the newspaper strip. Obviously, James Bond has been in many comics. We're going to hear about that in a little bit. This, I think, is from some other country. I grabbed this. This one, unlike all these others, is not in my collection. So this one I just pulled from online, which is why it's a little blurry. But I wanted to show you at least a little bit about the depiction of James Bond through the years. Obviously, you can see these were portraying Sean Connery and would have been probably totally additional storylines outside of Ian Fleming's version as well. And let's see the next one. Of course, we also have very famous fictional spies too that date back. So The Spy by James Fenimore Cooper, and Classics Illustrated would take the classic works of some, as it says, the world's greatest authors, and put them in comic book form. So the one on the left, this older, the 10-cent one, is from 1948. The one, at least on my right, is from 1969. Same story, just reprinted in different years to get a different audience. And then we also have the Australian version, which was probably from the 1950s or so. Now, fictional spies were not only, or comic book spies, not only about fictional spies, but also would deal with actual stories. So this book from 1961, also by Classics Illustrated, featured some real world spy techniques in their discussions. Again, for kids, but here we have different descriptions of telephone tapping, concealed microphones, disguised cameras, microdots, how spies use stamps in World War I. So Classics Illustrated was a very educational publication for, obviously, and they were trying to use this to educate our youth back 60 years ago. And codes and ciphers. So thankfully, the kid who owned this did not write in the comic book that I now own. But if you wanted to use your ciphers and send secret messages to your friends, you had that type of information in the comic book. Now, as I get to a close, these two books, Granada from about 1984, and I'm not even, my Spanish is horrible, I won't pronounce it, but it says School of Traitors. What makes these two books so important in comic book history is that they were, from what we understand, created by a man named Malcolm Ader, who had an office downtown DC for his business Commercial Comics. And these two books were allegedly created for the Central Intelligence Agency as in order to disseminate them into Latin America to destabilize the communist governments down there. Whether that was successful, not entirely sure, but I've been trying to trace the history of these books, and the CIA has not been willing to share its secrets with me yet. Now, that brings us to the end of my short presentation on, at least on comic books. And we end, of course, where we began, so to speak, with James Bond. I'm going to stop my sharing, and I'd like to bring in my two friends, Andy and Shawn. And guys, what I want to throw it out to you first with my question is, as I go through this history of comic books, most of which was just totally fictional, written for kids, even though they said it was ripped from the headlines, so to speak, it wasn't. You're writing and drawing for more mature audiences in 2021 and the last 20 years or so. We're in 2022 now, right? The last 20 years or so. When you are writing, when you are drawing, how accurate are you trying to make it to the real world of Spies? What kind of research are you doing, if any, when you do your James Bond stories and your other stories? What do you do to pull those together?
I do a fair amount of research, but I can't claim to be any kind of expert on the real world of espionage. But I find that for me, research is more like it's a source of inspiration rather than something that I try to. I don't worry too much about being completely accurate to reality, because reality's boring. We read stories because we want to be entertained, right? Reality's a mess and it's too complicated. So yeah, but I jump around taking inspiration from the research I do, and something will spark and it'll make me think, what if? Like with James Bond Kill Chain, for example, I was putting that story together, like plotting it out around 2015, 2016. And I was thinking that, to rewind slightly, the James Bond comics we were doing, the idea was that it was Ian Fleming's James Bond rather than the movie Bond. So it's the book Bond, but we wanted to bring him into the present day. Now, the obvious big difference between the present day movies and the books from the 50s is like, well, there was the Cold War back then. So I really wanted to bring back Smersh, the Russian kind of active measures bad guys from the early books, because most of those early Bond villains were Smersh based. Russia's up to all kinds of naughty tricks at the moment, and it seemed an appropriate thing to do. So I started researching what they'd been up to in Ukraine, and over the past sort of decade or so, and all this, like I say, this was 2015. And this is where I first learned about these cyber attacks and fake news and false flags and all this kind of stuff. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting if they started applying that to the West, to Britain and America? Little knowing when I was pitching it to Dynamite Comics and the Fleming estate that it was, this was just before everything kicked off, with interfering with the democratic process and the Mueller report and all the rest of it. So it was. I'm not saying I predicted everything, but it was, I like the idea of kind of like, seeing what's going on in the world and saying, what if? Because I think Bond has always kind of reinvented itself for each kind of generation, each decade it's set in. So, you want to kind of keep it current, but you do, I think it's important to have like a taste of reality in there, but like, a grounding of reality, but then you just kind of accentuate it a little bit, turn it up to 11 to make it into something entertaining. And hopefully not a lecture, because who wants that?
From the artist standpoint, I was looking at one of your handiwork earlier today of a handgun that one of the spies was handling, and I was wondering, is that a real Glock 19 or Glock 48 or whatever, Smith & Wesson or something, or are you just drawing a really cool gun? I mean, do you go to that kind of detail to be accurate when you're depicting the automobiles, the spy gadgets, and the like?
Well, the way the artist-writer relationship works in comics is that Andy will write the script, and then I'll get the script, and then I'm pretty much reading what he's asking for. So, and Andy's really good about supplying reference, and he's very specific about, if the model of the gun is important, he'll put that in the script. If he's not, then it's up to me. But if he puts a Glock 15 or whatever in the script, then I'll go to Google or I'll go to eBay. Like I have a whole box of fake guns that I literally have, and I was like, geez, what they're doing is they're coloring parts of the guns so that like kids can't use them in the streets and the cops can't get fooled. But it kind of gets annoying to me because I'm try to draw like a big yellow gun, and I'm like, okay, but I usually try to get very accurate with the reference. So whatever is in the script that I'm given, if it's a location or a piece of tech or a weapon, I go to Google.
Well, why don't you guys tell a little bit about the work that you've done on comics relating to Spies, and we will also bring in Hannah to give us some visual examples as well that you can walk through while she's showing some of them.
And I want to start, actually, I'm going to go back a little with Bond because I have some of the covers, Andy, and you're talking about research. So I'm just going to share that first. So here's some of those wonderful covers. But you guys were wonderful and sent me hundreds of images to pull from. So I pulled some of my favorites, but because we were a spy museum, the one that of course I loved was this. And for our spy fans out there, you should recognize this building. MI6, and you told us a great story about this when we were practicing.
Yeah, this is the Vauxhall Cross, the MI6 building, which I kind of wandered around it taking reference photographs for the artist Luca Casalanguida, who's an Italian artist, but fantastic guy. Yeah, and I was kind of half expecting to get arrested by security for going around taking photographs of a highly secure building in central London, but nobody cares. I guess tourists take photos all the time. But funnily enough, the building just in the background, that rather squarish, brutalist looking building, is where my mum used to work. She used to work for BT in the same building. So like she could look out of her office window and see them building the new MI6 headquarters. So yeah, it always felt familiar from my childhood, weirdly.
Let's see. I also am timekeeper today, so I'm going to make sure we stay on track so we get to show everyone a lot of things. So I'm actually going to jump ahead to the work that you guys worked on together, which is Thief of Thieves. So we are kind of going to do something a little bit different tonight. There's a lot of various scenes we can go through. I don't know if you guys want to start how you guys started collaborating on this, where it started, and then we'll dig into some of the scenes.
Well, Thief of Thieves was done with Robert Kirkman, who is the genius guy behind the Walking Dead comic book and ultimately the TV show. And Robert had reached out to me to work with him on a new series that did involve zombies, and that was Thief of Thieves. And during the course of the series, which ran 43 issues, we had a series of different writers. And Andy came on the third arc. And basically we worked together for 4 arcs of story. So that's how we started working together. But I have to give Andy a big shout out because when we first started working together on Andy's series, The Losers, which was a Vertigo comic book published by DC Comics and made into a movie. And I had drawn, and this was by Andy and Jock, the very talented artist. And they both created and wrote and illustrated these books. And so I did a 2-part story in this issue. And so I was already a big fan of Andy's even before Thief of Thieves. But then when Kirkman said that Andy was coming on board, I was super excited. And like I said, we worked on 4 arcs, just creating these stories. And Thief of Thieves is all about a international thief who just steals artwork. Did he ever steal tech or whatever? But he was primarily like an art thief. And yeah, so there were a lot of elements that Andy was, as the writer, was pulling from spy. There were a lot of spy elements in it, and so it was always fun to draw. So that's pretty much the origin of Thief of Thieves.
I think what Kirkman's genius is he did it with The Walking Dead and he did it with Thief of Thieves, is to take like genres that usually, like the kind of movie genres that usually are just very much a self-contained story with a beginning, middle, and end. Like a zombie movie or a heist movie, they're very finite. They're self-contained. They end like just after like 90 minutes, 2 hours, right? But what Robert does is he thinks, okay, well, what if we spin that out into an ongoing, like more of an ongoing drama, like The Walking Dead with zombies and like Thief of Thieves with the heist caper. But with Thief of Thieves, it kind of presented the same problem as The Losers. The Losers was originally pitched as a beginning, middle, end, like semi-military espionage heist caper, ultimately. But when they asked me to make it an ongoing series, I was like, okay, I need to make it an ongoing series of heists, basically. And then, so that was exactly the same thing that Thief of Thieves ended up having to be. And I think that's why, like, I originally only signed on for one arc of Thief, but then Robert seemed to like what we were doing together. And he was like, well, just, that works, keep doing that, you know, so that was fun. But the first arc that I came on, it was like you said, it was the third arc, where the whole thing had been building up towards the biggest heist of his career. That, like, since issue 1, they've been talking about this, spent years planning this Venice heist, and we'd seen this cast of characters around it. So I said to Robert, okay, so what is the Venice heist? And he was like, oh, okay, so who are all these specialists he's assembled that we've seen, you know? And he's like, okay. So I just had to make the whole thing up out of whole cloth, but I kind of stitched it together from the, you know, glimpses of characters we'd seen in the background in the early issues and so on. And it was a lot of fun. And towards the later stuff we did, you know, like, as you say, we started to bring in more of an espionage element. I'm interested in what's happening to democracy, honestly, and like the corrosive effect of money on democracy, and you know, and misinformation and disinformation. And so the Gold Rush arc was me starting to kind of bring in some of that slightly more espionage-y flavor into it, with like oligarchs trying to get their hands on the means of destabilization and so on. But I eventually got to the point where I was like, okay, it's time for me to let somebody else have a go now. So, like, I was very happy to see Brett Lewis step in, who wrote The Winterman, which is like absolutely one of the greatest comics ever. And if you're a fan of espionage, I would thoroughly recommend you track down The Winterman by Brett Lewis. And yeah, that's worth checking out.
I think we got to dig into some of these scenes. So we decided to do something fun with you guys tonight, which I don't know if we've ever done on one of the webinars before. So Shawn and Andy were nice enough to send me 4 different scenes to kind of show you, talk about tonight. But we're not gonna have time to cover them all. So we figured we'd let you guys pick. So you're gonna see a poll pop up, and we want to know, do you want the guys to talk about a bike chase, the Dubai scene, a car chase, or London? I'm dying to know what people are going to vote for too.
Oh, look at it. Host and panelists can't vote, the system is telling me.
I know, I'm sorry. It's the
I
one
think that's,
I don't have.
I think that's because she thinks I'll always cheat.
Yeah.
I vote for the motorcycle scene.
You're going to go motorcycle? All right, I'm going to wait because 2 of them are tied real fast. I'm going to wait a second and then we'll. Okay, so I have all your answers.
I also vote motorcycle.
You vote motorcycle. Okay, well, we're actually going to start with London. That's where most people voted.
Nothing wrong with London. I worked in London. Love it.
So I think that MI6 photo may have just pushed everyone to London. So let's pop into London. Oh, you guys tell us about this scene. You know, you sent me it, so I'm really excited to hear about it.
All right. Well, actually, Andy, I'll let you set up the actual storyline, but I'll just give some context to everybody. There are no words on these panels because this is the actual original art. And the way comic books are made, they're made like a series of layers. So Andy will write the script. He'll give it to me as the artist, and I'll pencil and then ink the art, which is what you see here. And then the letterer comes in and adds Andy's script in digitally, and then the colorist comes in and adds a digital color layer. So I don't have access to the actual final pages with the color. So that's why you're just seeing them as I drew them without the word balloons. So Andy, you want to set it up, the story?
Yeah, I guess like partly it's I wanted to write a story set in London because I'm from London. Like I took the losers to London too. It's kind of like I want to set things on my home turf. But I think another part of it is that I guess when you're a writer, you kind of like, when you're wandering around, you just kind of, you'll see something and think there's a story in that. And with me, it happens with buildings, like, you know, like the Shard in London. This you see in the first panel on the left there, this very tall, spiky skyscraper that people think looks like the fortress of Sauron. I was like, okay, no, I can just see Conrad Paulson trying to climb up the side of that building, you know. And like, okay, so why is he in that building? And that's just like where my brain goes, you know. It's like, okay, so he's got to break in there. Why is he got to break in there? What's he stealing? Who's trying to stop him? The difficulty when you're doing, you know, a caper series is that you don't want to repeat yourself. You know, like you're trying to do an Ocean's 11 movie every month, and becomes quite exhausting because there's only so many like laser tripwires you can bypass and safes you can crack and all the rest of it before it starts getting stale, you know. So I had a bit of fun with this one, it's always fun trying to come up with situations that he can't get out of and then trying to figure out how he gets out of them. Like in this one, when he's trying to steal the blueprints for the thing, you can see in the last panel in the bottom right-hand corner there, he finally gets to the blueprints and opens it up, and somebody's beaten him to it and left him a little note to say, surprise, which then leads into the car chase sequence. With this story, we've got like, he's one of the 3 greatest thieves in the world, all of whom are competing with each other to try and get the prize. And frame, like, so here's Conrad getting framed, and we've got the armed response team coming in to try and stop him. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. But the whole running through a wall thing probably makes it look like a superhero comic. But what you don't see, because the dialogue here is, he's talking to Celia, who's the kind of like the techie in the van who's helping him out. She's looking at the cameras, and he says, so the wall at the end of the corridor there, is that made of brick or plasterboard? And she's like, I don't know, why? He's like, I guess we'll find out, because he needs an exit. So fortunately, the wall was only made of plasterboard. So there we go. But he's still got to get out of the building.
Yeah, it was. This was a very fun scene to kind of choreograph and design, and it's very weird because during the course of working with Andy on Thief of Thieves, Andy would suggest a location that I hadn't been to yet, and then I would Google, and then I would end up going to that location in real life maybe a couple issues later, and I'm like, I could have used going to this beforehand. But I remember I was visiting London, and I was in London. I remember seeing the Shard as it was being built, and I thought it was a really cool structure. So this whole sequence of Conrad, he starts out, if you want to back up a little bit in the early pages, you know, he works his way into the office, and he kind of knocks out the contact who's sort of showing around. He lays the guy out in the bathroom, opens up like a vent, and then he looks into like the elevator shaft. And we've seen this kind of a scene so many times in movies, but for me, like, and I'm a huge movie and television fan, so I think for this scene I was channeling Die Hard, like just Bruce Willis in the elevator shaft, and just sort of the way that kind of felt. And then when we kind of move into him slipping from the elevator shaft to the file room, and then ultimately running through the office with the people, was just really just fun. And there's like a lot of little details of people reacting to this guy running through their office during business hours. So that's always fun to sort of plug into these little details. Actually, if you look at that top panel, there's like a guy taking a selfie on like the top panel, like on the left-hand side, and just a woman just shocked, and he's like running through. And it's always funny, again, in Thief of Thieves, where like Annie and I will do a sequence or an action scene, and then it'll pop up in a movie. So I really thought about like Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible Fallout, which is one of my favorite. I love that film. I can watch it over and over again. But when he's kind of running through that office, I was like, okay, all right.
A little familiar. Yeah, that's happened a few times. So there's a few things I've done, like in Silent Dragon, I wrote a scene where it's drawn by Lanil Yu, who is one of the greatest comic artists. There's a scene with a giant robot samurai with a rotary cannon fighting somebody with a samurai sword. And then that exact image popped up in Sucker Punch. And there's a bit in The Losers where Jensen shoots somebody just with his fingers, but they get shot. And it's like, what happened? And it turns out like he's got sniper cover. But then, and that scene is in the Losers movie, but I think like, was it The Expendables or something, I think stole it first, and it's always, because part of my job as an action writer is to kind of come up with cool stuff you haven't seen before, but still in a grounded but exciting, action milieu. And then when somebody else in Hollywood just kind of like, oh, I'm taking that, it's a little galling, honestly.
Well, I have to say though, and if you want to jump real quick to the car chase scene, I don't know what.
Yeah, I wanted to go. That's my favorite.
People say you can't do car chases in comics, and those people have clearly never read Akira. You can totally do car chases in comics. And Shawn, can I just say, this is the kind of scene that reinforces what an absolute pleasure it has always been working with you, because you make this stuff come to life. I should tell everybody, right? Writing comics is easy compared to drawing comics. It's the artists who do the real work, right? And like, you make it look like it moves, and that's the thing. I'm completely in your hands, but you bring it to life.
Andy, I'm sending you a whole lot of love over the pond. Yeah, everybody, like whenever I get an Andy script, I'm like, okay, I don't know how I'm gonna get out of this one. And in this car chase scene, I mean, of course, a car chase scene, you're like, oh, geez, I got to draw a car chase scene. And, you know, the trick is just trying to keep the angles interesting, the angles, you know, the action moving. And like I said before, I'm a huge film and television buff. So I'm like using camera tricks, you know, so I'm always having something happening in the foreground, middle ground, background, tilting the camera angles so that we're kind of getting motion. But this is an interesting scene because I think, I don't know, Andy, were you specific with the car that he chooses, that old BMW, or did I come up with that?
I think that was you, because I think the idea is that the rival thief who's just stolen the plans is in the kind of like in a Lamborghini or a Lotus or whatever it is.
Okay.
And so, but and like Conrad ends up in some kind of jalopy kind of thing. But I think you picked what that was. I don't remember honestly, but I think that was you. But I think it's a nice touch because like he's in something that's just kind of like doesn't look like it can compete, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And if you keep going, Hannah, like as we watch this scene progress, he's just like, I mean, like this is all downtown London. I'm kind of fudging geography a little bit, but I chose that car, and just because it, like Andy said, it was like an old car compared to like this, you know, fast Lamborghini. And then I saw them use that car in Fallout, which I love that movie. I can watch the movie over and over again, but I'm like, wait a minute. Okay. All right. Whatever. You know, it's a nice, I like the side by side. So Christopher McQuarrie, Tom Cruise, we're big fans. We're big fans.
I'll tell you what, can I just say, I'm a huge fan of Christopher McQuarrie and have been since The Usual Suspects. And I love what he's doing with Mission Impossible. So, you know, but yeah, you know, it does look a little familiar.
John, without being specific, how often do you draw friends and family into the comic books?
Oh, I use friends and family all the time. I mean, people who know me are used to me plugging them in as models. Yeah, and that goes all the way back to art college because I went to the School of Visual Arts in New York, and you know, whenever you're painting something, I'm like, Dad, my mom, my sister, just cousins, everybody has been in a comic at some point. So I totally use people that I know or famous people or people who have good looks, you know, when I'm kind of designing characters. So it's always fun. And it's always great to kind of research things. So I think, for example, when I did this car, I was literally looking for something that was kind of older, but had like a kind of a cool look to it. And, you know, yeah, but reference is the name of the game, you know. So if you look at a lot of those streets, I think that I was pulling from when I was in London visiting, and I was walking by the Barbican area. And so there are actual streets that do line up. Some of the geography I'm kind of fudging, but at the same time, it's just really fun just creating like a car chase on the page.
Yeah, when I wrote that scene, I did kind of figure out the geography. You know, there was a whole there was like a 3-page sequence set on the bridge right there from London Bridge, but there just wasn't room in the issue. We only had like 20 pages or something, so I just had to, like, you know, I wrote 3 pages and didn't get paid for them because they ended up on the cutting room floor. You know.
Well, look, that's like any with pop culture and movies in particular. So the movie True Lies, that's a great spy movie, right? With Arnold Schwarzenegger back in like 1994. And it happened, at least in part, but a good part of it was in Washington, D.C. And so those of us who watch that film know that all of a sudden he's in Georgetown on a horse, and then the horse leaps, and it's all of a sudden he's in like McPherson Square or Farragut North Park, which is like 2 miles down the road. That was a hell of a jump that horse just made.
Well, Mark, you know what I realized though, once I moved down here, is that then they jumped to downtown LA at the Century, at the hotel, you know, that hotel where he gets in the elevator, like that's downtown LA. And I'm just like, wait a minute, that's not here. But yeah, but you only know that when you know the geography of the places. But actually that actually makes me want to ask Mark a question, because Mark, since you deal with real life spies, real life, you know, intelligence, are there movies that really drive you crazy when you see them? But I'm very curious to see what you think about the Bourne movies in terms of authenticity.
Yeah, you know, it's not even just the movies. Obviously, the movies are fictional. It's more even in newscasts when folks refer to CIA case officers as agents, which is just factually incorrect and sloppy. Because an agent's the individual, the asset, the individual that people handle, not the case officers. that are around, or when you see an analyst do all sorts of spy stuff. Definitely it will drive you crazy. The same thing with like in lawyer movies or lawyer TV shows. Oftentimes these television shows and movies have real lawyers, real spies in the background advising them, which in fact they need. The spies, I do a lot of work with representing these folks who have to get their work cleared through pre-publication review so they can advise comic book artists, writers, movies, televisions to make sure they don't violate their non-disclosure agreements. But look, the Jason Bourne, I've read those books. Robert Ludlum is a fantastic writer. Chancellor Manuscript is actually one of my favorites. Not as much about the Bourne itself. If I'm getting the right author correct, right?
Yeah.
I hope. Not throwing something off. Anyway, but it gets crazy where, for the same reason why I don't like that you jump from one scene to the next, like in True Lies, where I kind of start tuning out. That's personal to me. I don't watch Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible. I'm still stuck on the television show from the 60s. That's what I grew up on.
Well, I hate to jump in, but we have a lot of
some questions.
One more beautiful image, just because it's so pretty. But I'm going to bring back our wonderful moderator, Amanda.
Hello. We have so many questions. You guys are so interesting. And Hannah, thank you for bringing their images to life and side by sides with the movies that stole from them. I hear you, Shawn, I hear you, but it is flattery. Imitation is flattery. We will not, I'm going to say right off, there's no way we're going to get to all the questions, but we will share them with the panel later. So you guys can follow up if you want to, but we will start off with one that I'm rather fascinated by that is for Andy, and it is from a fan of your Bond books and saluting you for bringing back Smersh, and wants to know what was like working with Ian Fleming Publications on the series. Are there any characters or organizations or ideas that were like off limits, or and we've worked with Ian at the Spy Museum, so a little inside baseball for me too.
Yeah, well, I was a little nervous to start with, because in the world of comics, when you're doing licensed comics, like if you have Star Wars or something like that, like a license that's not owned by the publisher, often you've got like marketing people or something you've got to deal with who start nitpicking, and it can be a bit of a drag. And I was preparing myself mentally for that. I mean, it's fair enough, Bond is a huge international franchise, and so they want to make sure you do it right. And it was a joy. They were great. They were just what I kind of pitched the story, and they were like, yeah, cool, do that, And there was no friction. There was zero drag. It was great. It was an absolute pleasure. Pleasant, yeah, like surprisingly so. I think I can barely remember any feedback they gave me in terms of things they wanted changing. I think there's a scene set in like a NATO airbase in Turkey or something, and they literally knew the specific runways, and I'm like, oh, actually, I think you'll find that this is the one that heads like west towards the Mediterranean. I'm like, okay, great. I don't know. I was just making stuff up, but if you actually know this stuff, then great, I'll use it. Thank you. And that was as bad as it ever got. So if it makes me sound like I know what I'm talking about, great. Because frankly, I don't. I just make it up.
I'm always surprised they've got new location, that there's anywhere new to shoot at. Whenever you go to a Bond movie, you're like, they found somewhere that they haven't shot at before, or they've returned to it. All right, Mark, there's a question from our friend and former spy historian, Mark Stout, wants to know if the FBI or any other intelligence agencies consult with comic producers, in order to get things in a little more favorable light, as the CIA has the, entertainment liaison office. Are they getting the word out in the comic world?
Yeah, I mean, it's a damn good question. And, as I showed, at least with Malcolm Ader's books, where we know this was somehow connected to the agency, the Kent Blake Secret Service book I showed from 1951, it had a caption on the inside that said, for obvious reasons, the name Kent Blake is fictitious. as the use of his real name would endanger his mission and his life, but all other facts and incidents are accurate. I doubt it. I really doubt it. Now, we do know historically that the CIA and the FBI was very much engaged behind the scenes to ensure, more so the FBI, a very positive image. So I wouldn't doubt it. But again, because the comics back in where I collect and discuss are predominantly were written for kids, I don't get the sense there was a lot of interaction between the US government and a lot of the comics. Although every once in a while, there was a comic that was definitely done in collaboration with the US government to be issued for that purpose of promoting something along the lines of whatever the storyline was.
For Shawn, a really good question. And then somebody snarky with your same last name wants to know if you brought martinis for everyone. But the real question is from someone who is a big fan of your work, wanting to know if you change up your style of illustration, your approach to layout and design for espionage and heist. Are those different, espionage and heist, or what, do you change?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think I have my way that I tell a story visually, and I just try to dramatize whatever the writer gives me in a script. So if it's a Harlequin romance story, which I don't normally get those kind of scripts, I'll try to make it look very lush, warm and inviting. And if it's like a cold hard espionage, act sequence, I just try to make it look gritty or really try to match whatever tone the writer is writing. So I don't think I changed my style, but I just try to visualize whatever is written on the page as dramatically as I possibly can.
Okay, here's a question I can't resist. This is for Andy, and I got to read it because it's so well written. Andy, loved Hammerhead, loved Green Arrow, year one. Was it weird when the Green Arrow TV series created a character with your last name as an Easter egg, or was it weirder when they added a character with your exact name?
They were both pretty weird. Yeah, it was nice to get a name check, because like Green Arrow year one was, according to the producers, like what was one of the various different comics that helped to inspire the show. But the character in the show initially, the David Ramsey character, was called John Diggle. But what they didn't know is that I do actually have a brother called John. So, and he's not a comic nerd. He doesn't read comics. He doesn't know. But so I got him the action figure, okay, congratulations, you're an action figure now. And then they introduced his brother called Andy Diggle. Okay, now it's getting weird. Yeah, that was kind of like, okay, this feels a bit stalkery. But no, obviously it's extremely flattering. It is.
Okay, we have so many questions, and I promise to the audience, because we really don't have much time, that these will get sent to the panelists. But I love this question because it's the same for everyone, wondering, do you have a favorite nonfiction spy story or real spy? And then Andy or Shawn, have you ever drawn inspiration from a particular real life spy or spy story? So.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I think that some of the stuff that I've drawn from, I think Robert Baer, I don't know how I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Bob Baer.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, because I've read a couple of his books, like both fiction and nonfiction. And, I think Syriana was kind of loosely based on him as well. But yeah, I like that kind of groundedness in my spy stories. That probably sounds weird because I know I'm kind of known for the guy who writes stuff exploding all the time. But that's the kind of stuff I enjoy to watch, is the more grounded side of things. So yeah, I think he, and again, he's kind of he's paying attention to what's actually really going on. And that would be my choice.
Oh, you kind of stumping me on that one. I think in projects that I'm writing, I might pull from a real life source, but if it's a book that I'm drawing, I don't know, I tend to pull from fiction and movies and TV shows that I've seen, or maybe a model or someone who has an interesting look that I can kind of use as reference. But I can't say that I've actually pulled from a real life spy. I've met some really interesting CIA and FBI. I don't want to say, well, they're not all agents, but some of them are field workers or but they work in the office and they're very interesting. I'm kind of waiting for an instance to plug them into something, but haven't yet.
All right, Mark, bring it home.
So, I mean, my collection, I like collecting very rare and esoteric comics. And so I collect all these espionage comics just to have an example. I collect comics about lawyers and legal scenes because of that. To be perfectly honest, don't tell anybody, I don't really read the stories that much. First of all, they're old and they're not that good at times. Some of them are great. But let me bring in another question that was asked about Argo, because Argo, which I enjoyed as a great movie, and is very much a fictional movie. It's based on real life events, but they fictionalized a lot of key scenes. And of course, it's connected to the Mendez, Donna and Tony, who are, Tony's unfortunately passed away, but huge supporters of the Spy Museum. Love them both. And the key thing about the comic book connection was that Jack Kirby, one of the best artists ever in comic book history, was the one who did the Argo storyboards, of which were auctioned off not that many years ago for way more money than I was able to afford buying any of these pieces of great art. But there are these connections. It kind of goes to Mark Stout's question before, and another question that I saw about whether comic books are used for political purposes. Yes, absolutely, they are. And Argo is a good example of what was done back to rescue our hostages in Iran, or at least some of them. And we've also seen lots of promotional comic books used for political purposes, usually overtly, that a politician, they don't do it much anymore, but in the 50s and the 60s in particular, politicians would use comic books to promote themselves for voting purposes. In fact, I will advocate right here and now, especially because we're recording it, that the Spy Museum should do a promotional comic book, and we can bring Andy and Shawn involved, and I'll give some spy stories to you guys to help craft them as well.
Wow.
Do a promotional comic book for the museum to help draw in more members and visitors.
Mark, you may get what you wish for, so just stay tuned for the next episode. Very interesting idea of yours, sir. So I want to thank, I like it, and it might have some real legs. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, for answering 3 of the 700 questions. We're going to share them with everybody. Folks were so excited and they want to know about particular characters that they loved. So it was a wonderful audience, an incredible panel. And I want to say we also saluted members. Yeah. Let's cheer. Cheers. I love it. Love it.
Glasses, though.
Since we have a little spotlight on membership, I want to let any Spy Museum members who are watching or listening know that later this week, you're going to learn about a very special opportunity just for members later in February. So it pays to join. So join, and then you can have a cool card like Mark and Shawn, and you can hang out with cool people like Mark and Shawn and Hannah, and uncool people like me.
Are you feeling pressure, Andy, that you need to join?
Yeah, I'm not cool. It's fine.
Yeah.
I'm not cool.
No, you're cool. You're cool.
I've learned to live with it. It's fine.
Well, this has been.
We have a Spy Museum event in London.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, you don't have to ask me twice. Well, everyone, stay well. Stay as delightful as you are. Stay dapper. No one's allowed to take off their fancy clothes until midnight. So, all right. Cheers, everyone. Take care.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
See you at the museum.
Bye.